So my guests are seated. Professor Godfrey Bokwing is economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana. Madam Mona Korte is managing partner, BVM Advisory Services, former Deputy Minister of Finance. Ernest Kofi Abuchi is immediate past dean, Gimpa Law School. And on the phone with us will be Joe Jackson, Director of Business Operations, Dalex Finance. We shall have a second round where the panel will change. So thank you very much for joining us. The first issue we are looking at, as you know, has to do with the city's behavior. In very ordinary local parlance, with not too much of understanding, but with the populist campaign understanding and language, we understood that, you know, there was a certain arrest and there was a certain imprisonment, and the keys had been, you know, as it were, thrown away or handed to the IGP. So what exactly is happening? What answers does Dr. Bawumia have at this time round? Shall we do campaign with the city anymore? Right. So let's begin, and let's hear Imani's Franklin Kujo, who has something to tell us about a certain Forex Development or Management Committee that had been set up, and people had linked that, or in fact, it appears that was its purpose, to work on the city's conduct, misbehavior. Let's hear Franklin Kujo speak about the committee and what they were set up to do, and find out why critics and economists are against what has been done by the government.
And why the committee, we joined the committee, was because there was an understanding that the transparency needed in the management of currency flows was not enough, which actually meant that looking at the informal sector of that part of the conversation was useful. So for instance, I mean, if the country reported, in a hypothetical sense, reported a $10 billion dollar receipt, officially reported, but actually we could record just 7 billion, and not that the 3 billion was stolen by a group of people working in tandem to do that, but simply because there are avenues that these things are being externalized and we are not recording properly. It's important to understand that. So GUTA, for instance, is there because they are the last layer that actually interface with our international trading community. Are there persons who know that they are engaging in trading and using physical cash? What could be done about it? Should we interest ourselves in travelers' checks? Because a plane load from Ghana to Asia each time, according to my good friend lawyer Fosudote, carried not less than $300,000 on that plane. With the hindsight of international payments systems, it could be useful that we are doing this and settling payments in our own currency.
So Franklin Kujo is a member of that committee, and we understand that even those who are doing it on the side, somehow, how illegally, are being invited to join that committee to see how they can work on, do their work. So let me start with Professor Bokwing. And you may have heard people like celebrated people that we have no doubts about their credentials when it comes to this area. Professor Korte, he says that the Bank of Ghana does a better job than this, seeking to support Mr. Kwame Pienin, who says this is a needless PR stunt and must be dissolved immediately. Why do you think they think the way they think?
Thank you very much, and then good morning to our cherished listeners and viewers. So it's an interesting development. I'm looking at it from the angle that the depreciation of the cedi goes beyond just the boundaries of Bank of Ghana. It's a political...
First of all, educate us, how bad is the situation now?
Okay, so the cedi has been depreciating since it was introduced somewhere middle of 1965, and it will continue to depreciate for the foreseeable future. It's as simple as that.
We're talking about recent history.
Yes.
From change of government.
Yes.
And the promises that this was about, you know, as it were, bad economists, bad managers. This was about incompetence, and that competence was taking over, and this was going to stop.
So a certain exaggeration of ability to do something was at play. That, I think, is common knowledge now.
Dr. Bawumia was exaggerating?
To a large extent.
Or was being untruthful?
Not being untruthful, because when you are in opposition, the way you see things, I think, is different. When you are in government, the way things play out is also different. There's sometimes the theory doesn't work the way it is expected, and the reason is not because the theory is wrong, it's because the assumptions cannot be validated within a certain context. That is also there.
But so comparatively, taking the last 4 years of the Mahama administration and the almost 4 years that we have done with the NPP administration, who has been a better manager at the cedi's conduct?
I think when you look at it, maybe, so 2019 under the NPP, I think it's a bit terrible.
A bit terrible?
Yeah, it's a bit terrible. Largely also because I sense that the Bank of Ghana, from the middle of last year, perhaps was thinking about building its international reserves, maybe looking forward to 2020, which is rather the election year where the exposure is high, and therefore perhaps did not do market intervention, maybe to steer the depreciation within a certain band, because they were looking forward. That perhaps might have occasioned the rate of depreciation we saw. But it's not an outlier if you look at it within the last 8 years. You can talk about 2014, you can talk about maybe 2013, and all of that. So the message I get is that, you know what, we are getting to the stage where, and I'm also happy, because we are getting to the stage where we can conclude that politicians will have to be measured in terms of the hope they seek to offer and the ability to do ABC also, whether it's the NPP or is the NDC. Because the reality on the ground is that you cannot do politics with the cedi.
So is it fair to say at this point that the NPP has been incompetent at managing the cedi?
I wouldn't say so, because the other side of the argument is that, okay, it could have been worse without them.
But it was not this worse without them when they said it was a matter of incompetence.
Well, so I do not want to go along that line, because not that we subscribe totally to that line of thought, but I also believe that Bawumia's era in opposition gave us a lot to think about. We enjoyed Bawumia in opposition because of the approach he adopted, which we are not even seeing from the NDC, that they are in opposition. So that gave a certain kind of confidence that, okay, with a change in government, things were going to change necessarily. But that is proving otherwise. Again, perhaps they are doing their best. Maybe that is not enough. There are structural issues that perhaps may take more than 2 years, 3 years to change, which occasions the depreciation of the cedi. In fact, yesterday I was having an interaction with the independent evaluation office of the IMF, and I told them that we have spent more time under the hands of the IMF since independence than we have actually spent on our own. And yet the structure of the economy we inherited from 1957 hasn't changed. So which doctor will be giving you medicine and every now and since independence, we have gone to the IMF 16 times. And all of, so there are structural issues that I believe that would take a little longer. And I believe that every government that we have seen perhaps has tried to do something about, but we haven't seen that consistency.
So the FX Development Committee, was it its job to try and fix the situation, or it had a different job as to how to improve the management, transparency, and long-term structure of Ghana's foreign exchange flows?
So something. So that's interesting. So look. So my considered view is that the solution would not necessarily come from the FX Development Committee. They do not have what it, not that what it takes, but it doesn't depend on that committee alone to cause structural changes to the economy.
I ask you that because there's a suggestion that this is not why the committee was put in place.
So, and I'm also looking at it that whether we like it or not, there are developments in this economy and outside this economy that impact the Cedi, which are completely outside the domain of Bank of Ghana. So to the extent that Bank of Ghana is limited to some, in terms of its overall perspective, not in terms of lack of knowledge, but they do not have control over that. When it comes to knowledge, I think Bank of Ghana has that. When it comes to why the Cedi depreciate, Ministry of Finance has that. Even the literature has that. You can go back to 2014 Baumia's letter, Restoring the Value of the Cedi, at Central University College. And it's still a very beautiful document to read. In terms of the causes, if you look at it from Dwarf's perspective, or from the fundamentals of the economy, dollarization and all of that. So for instance, let me just give you an example. The just ended IMF program had one very great objective, which was to eliminate the physical dominance of monetary policy. And it was the reason why the IMF decided to reduce the financing of the budget deficit by central bank from 10% to 0%, even though Ghana's parliament put it at 5%. For the sake of keeping to the IMF program, we signed an undertaking, both by the governor of Bank of Ghana and then the Minister of Finance, to keep to the zero financing, because there was a major source of abuse and also the reason why the Cedi depreciate and price development heads up. So we did that. Why did we do that? Because under inflation targeting, one key requirement for effective inflation targeting in reducing inflation and engineer growth is fiscal discipline, which is outside the control of Bank of Ghana, that has the constitutional mandate to ensure price stability. And in this case, we are talking about exchange rate. So to that extent, then, so from there, you can look at maybe the composition of the committee in terms of, okay, let's come together, let's iron out ideas, let's discuss, let's see. And then also the demand side from Guta and the others. In fact, it's so interesting in this country, a group of people can just be importing. Their business is not to produce. They import, okay, whilst we are looking for enhancing the productive sector of the economy, their business is to import, demand much dollars, and if they cannot find the dollars, hold a press conference and say that, do something about the dollar. But your activities negatively impacting that. But this is the country we all have.
Okay, so I needed a very clear, straight answer from you on your understanding of this Forex Exchange Development Committee, its work. Now, one of the gentlemen who is on a committee, and this is a committee of the Economic Policy and Coordinating Committee, that's the EPCC. One of the gentlemen who belongs to one of these committees, Evron Hughes, wrote and said their job is on how to improve the management, transparency, and long-term structure of Ghana's foreign exchange flows. It is not about arresting the decline or depreciation of the Cedi. It talks about how they are generating ideas and even how somebody suggests that they should bring in persons who operate in the black market, because when they do certain checks, they find that there is a certain, there's a certain lag. The official receipts as regards the forex, and then what the black market people bring in, you can clearly tell that there's something coming in that is not accounted for.
Or it's not captured, recorded.
It's not captured.
Yeah.
So what's your understanding? Was their job to fix this behavior of the city or not?
So my understanding is that it cannot be their job. And even if we decide to make it their job, they will fail, for which reason it ought to be dissolved. Because if you look at why the Cedi depreciates, the structural issues, the policy issues, and the management issues, and the transparency issues, this is just to maybe address just a small aspect of that. And for that reason, we cannot assign the stability of the city to this committee.
Okay.
It will be as good as asking, or as terrible as asking fish to climb a tree.
Okay. Mona, why is this strange to some of you in this area? And is this a sign that this government is at its wit's end?
Thank you, Samson, and good morning to our listeners. Happy New Year to everyone that I haven't seen this year. Samson, you know, in 2 words, what I think of this committee is government's effort to manage expectation. Like you said right at the beginning, certain statements were put out there, and therefore now that we are getting closer to elections, they have to manage expectation. And everyone does that. So I can understand the PR aspect of managing expectation of Ghanaians, because Ghanaians are beginning to ask questions.
So that the end game is a political gain.
Yeah, indeed, it is. Because, one, when you told us, and we also read in the paper about why the FX Development Committee was set up, they were referring to flows. And Dr. Bobkin has said the thing. Flows is really just a symptom. It's not the cause of the problem. When you look at flows, it's one part of the whole problem. The problem falls into monetary section and also into fiscal section, fiscal discipline, fiscal stabilization, and so forth. So it's really not just about flows. It's bigger than flows. I just want to say that really, if this committee is supposed to shadow the Bank of Ghana Treasury, then honestly, it's very an unnecessary effort, because the committee cannot complement the work of the Bank of Ghana. The big question to me will be why? One, although I'm not a lawyer, I want us to look at the constitutional and legal aspect. Constitutionally, we see in Article 183(2) and 182A and 184 that the Bank of Ghana was set up to clearly do certain things with respect to the city and how foreign exchange impacts it. They are even allowed, or let me put it there, they are permitted to disallow any foreign exchange transactions. So even as we speak about flows, the Bank of Ghana is the one who can say yes or no to what is accounted for and what is not accounted for. Although we all know that there is a lot that leaves this country in the form of export that is not accounted for. One such big example is gold.
Yeah.
We noticed that our outflow of gold and the values of that compared to the inflows into India and the value of that from Ghana did not tally. So you can monitor flows, but what will you do with that information? And even that information on its own cannot resolve the issue of the depreciation of the cedi. So in terms of law, the Constitution mandates only central bank to handle this task. Again, the Bank of Ghana Act itself, and even the amendment to it, the 2016 amendment to it, as that only Bank of Ghana can do that. The only authority that can oversee this activity is Parliament. And in the Constitution, 184, it says that Parliament is to request Bank of Ghana to bring reports to show what has been going on, so they can act or give them advice or recommendation on that. I'm not sure that this new committee has gained parliamentary approval. So I don't think that this committee is legitimate. Anyway, continuing on
the basis is what?
The basis, I believe,
for which
is
there
one.
is a need for parliamentary approval for a committee by a minister or a ministry?
I believe that if the task is to do with central bank activity, monetary policy, looking at foreign exchange rates, interest rates, and so forth, then it falls under the Bank of Ghana's role, which is clearly stated in the Constitution, that they must do it.
May need assistance, so he will, execute his job well.
In terms of fiscal discipline.
Yes.
But he has to, we have always, Ministry of Finance has always worked with the central bank on these issues. Now, if there is a need to further align or enhance this role, it is for the joint group to come out and tell us that there is now going to be an FX committee. I have to say, I have not heard anything in the news from Bank of Ghana saying that they are part of this effort.
But not doing so,
even though they are on the committee,
will not make it illegal or
even though they are on the committee. I don't believe that the fiscal, which is the Ministry of Finance on its own, can get up and say that I want to do this together with the Bank of Ghana without getting the permission of Parliament and also the buy-in of the Bank of Ghana. Up until now, we only know about one deputy governor being on the committee, but we have not heard from Bank of Ghana the fact that they also wish to have this committee that looks at only flows. Now, in the beginning, we've said that flows alone will not help to arrest the depreciation of the cedi.
Okay.
I also, from this, when I mentioned managing expectation, look at timing. 3 years into the management of the economy, nothing had been done. Yes, it was mentioned in the last budget, but just as we are going into elections, you set up a committee. When will the committee finish its work and take this small aspect of managing the cedi depreciation and feed it into the Ministry of Finance work of fiscal stabilization together with the Bank of Ghana's work on price stabilization to give us any results? Like Prof. Buckman said, I doubt that we are going to get any results in the near or medium term. Again, I want us to look at the facts, and I'm just building on what the academician here has said. The value of the cedi is fundamentally determined by supply and demand of foreign currency because it's about exchange rate.
Okay.
Value is relative. And of course, other technical aspects which involve cost of borrowing, so interest rates, and the level of existing government debt. This determines the risks associated with repayment of debt, debt servicing. All of this come together to create a stable economy, plus of course economic growth, to ensure that the cedi can be stable. So that even though the current cedi depreciation can be addressed by monetary policy, it also requires fiscal discipline to be addressed. And perhaps that is why you can see why the Minister of Finance is the one who is sort of leading or spearheading this effort, because he wants to have that partnership, to have a stable economy. For what reason? For credibility. Credibility plays a major role in calculating risk for pricing capital. As the minister goes out to issue bonds, the pricing of those bonds depend on
credibility.
Fiscal.
What did we go to Senchi for?
That was it.
Okay.
It was for credibility. What did we go to the IMF for the last time? Was for credibility.
We went to
again.
Senchi for homegrown.
Yes. So credibility is a very important thing in pricing of a country's risk, political risk, all those things that price capital. So I would like to look at capital, since it's a very major part of production costs. You know, like Prof has said, and we all know around this table, our economy is predominantly an agricultural one. We all know that. We've said that over and over again. What are we doing to change this? What we've all talked about is to add value to agricultural products so that we can export. So that Guta being the import side, we can also have another group who are the export side. After all, at the end of the day, it's about balance. Somebody must import and somebody must export. But we must have a balance rather than a deficit that erodes the stability of the economy. This country, like many other African countries, we lack capital. We don't have the capital. We have the resources. We don't have the capital. And some said, I'm going through this so that the lay person at home understands what public financial management sees. We lack capital. We don't have it. If we want to do oil and gas, we need foreign capital. We don't have the capital in here. mining, any type of mining, be it gold, bauxite, we need foreign capital. Even in agriculture, we need a certain foreign capital to come in to help us to buy plant and equipment and the things that we need on a consumable basis to grow, be it an agricultural economy or an industrial one. So long as capital is prized, and the way that is priced depends on risk of who is taking the capital. You will find that we as a weaker economy than where we are borrowing from will not be able to borrow dollars at the 1 and 2% that is borrowed in the US. We will end up borrowing at 7, 8, 9, 10, even sometimes 15%. This also impacts our local borrowing, and we are seeing that borrowing is still anywhere between 20 to 50% depending on where you borrow from. So it is important that we realize that so long as we do not have capital homegrown, in-house, and we have to go out and borrow, we will always face interest rate risks, foreign exchange risks. This is pure treasury management when it comes to that. And therefore, our cedi, as Dr. Popkin has said, will continue to depreciate until we change the structure of the economy. And as governments come and governments go, there has to be a time when we agree, both monetary and fiscal, that we need to do this work rather than talk about it. I think we've talked a lot about value addition, the value chain, moving from agri to industrial, using what we have to grow industry. We now have to walk the talk as a country. And that, I believe, is what will solve this problem. That is the cause. But if we continue to look at flows and traders and so forth, we are looking at the symptoms.
Okay.
So I believe government today is trying to manage expectation. And that is why, for pure economists and finance people, they see this as honestly unnecessary and an effort in futility at this point in time, because that is not what will resolve the issue. We must walk the talk of growing our economy, changing it fundamentally,
Some will
and
say,
reducing
some will say
our
this
debt
is a
as a
sign.
nation.
This is a sign of proactivity on the part of a management team, because I am looking at the average annual rate of depreciation of the cedi against the US dollar. And I'm looking at the Bank of Ghana's report as of December 20. That's last year.
2019.
Yes.
Okay.
You will see that between 2013 and 2016, we did the depreciation of 18.0. And then between 2017 and 2019, we did almost 9%. That's 8.73.
But last year it was about 12.7%, right?
Right.
Last year.
Yes, it was.
So that's what I said.
So
Last
generally,
year,
we are
last year seemed
our
to be
cedi
like an
depreciates.
outlier.
Yeah.
An outlier, but if you look at it over the period, and you can see why the central bank was doing this. I said that they perhaps intentionally were building their reserves against 2020.
And we've seen
Yes,
the
because
numbers.
if you look
They
at
have
the
built
first
the
58
reserves.
transaction days of 2019, the cedi lost quite rapidly against the dollar. But we are not seeing that now.
What do you
In the
say?
same
What do you
manner.
say briefly about the question about the capacity, legal or constitutional basis? Does it really matter the way Mona raises it if we look at it from the point of view that this is a committee of the EPCC, where the governor of the bank itself co-chairs, and then we understand that on this committee also a deputy governor of the bank.
It's one of the members.
Yes, it's a member. So the question that she raises about its, legality or constitution or appropriateness.
Or is it just an ad hoc committee to last a few months?
Is it something we should be thinking about?
Well, as an economist, when I see a professor of law or somebody from law, I feel dwarfed. So maybe Prof here would talk about it. But this is how I'm looking at it. And I agree to a large extent the PR aspect of the committee.
And the fact that it doesn't have parliamentary approval, will that even will there be a situation where halfway through its work, Parliament says you're not allowed to do this, stop work, and anyway it's not useful?
Maybe when we look at the mandate of the committee, And then I'm not too sure those who set it up, they set it up more or less to take over the powers of Bank of Ghana.
Well, you can't even do that if you try.
Yes, I'm not looking at it purely from that angle, but given the fact that, look, whether we like it or not, the Cedi's depreciation has moved beyond just the preserve of Bank of Ghana. Perhaps in recent times, the first town hall meeting of the economic management team was about the Cedi.
Yeah.
Essentially. Perhaps we would have wished that Bank of Ghana would rather tell us why it is so, but it's purely on the menu of of politics now. Look, when you go back to the Bible, the first time we are told Christ cracked the whip, it was about currency. Money changes in the temple. That's how prominent it was, even then, and all of that. So, but I want to, so I'm okay, value addition and all of that, but we are going beyond just value addition. And we are talking about the ownership content in the economy. Because as we're exporting, I can say we have been exporting. Because when you look at the statistics from Bank of Ghana, in fact, towards the end of 2016 to now, our trade balance is positive.
Okay.
True, Prof, and we have been exporting, but what are we exporting? Are we exporting enough so that we can have a surplus that is sustainable, not a surplus that shows up every now and then?
So let me get to Abuchi, and I'll return to you for brief wraps, looking into how to make this sustainable, because that's really what we all are looking forward to, so that, you know, we don't become interested in hoarding dollars, rather, instead of being proud of our own currency. Now, those who are raising the questions about legality and other things, they clearly say, well, the law, the Bank of Ghana Act is very clear. Whose responsibility, or the Constitution is clear, whose responsibility is it, or which institution has been nominated by law to be responsible for managing, you know, foreign exchange in the country? It's the Bank of Ghana. So why is the committee not a Bank of Ghana committee, but a Ministry of Finance committee?
Well, it's interesting that Honorable Monacote, the former Deputy Minister, will say this. And so from a legal standpoint, I have to be honest, I am not as worried as people are worried about this. There's a principle in interpretation that the lawmaker assumes what he says when he deliberately omits a word. Okay, so I give an example. If you look at Article 183, Article 183(1) specifically says that the Bank of Ghana shall be the only body that issues currency, only underlined. Article 183(2)B says the Bank of Ghana shall be the sole custodian of the funds of Ghana. Now contrast this with Article 183(2)A. 183(2)A omits these two words. That is sole or only. It says the Bank of Ghana shall be responsible for the stability of the currency. This is not accidental.
Well, not responsible, promote and maintain.
Maintaining the currency, yes, the stability of the currency.
Yeah.
This is not accidental.
I agree.
This is deliberate.
And that is why we said it is bigger than monetary.
Right.
It
and
involves fiscal discipline.
It is deliberate to the extent, it's deliberate to the extent partly of which Professor Bokpin mentioned earlier,
it takes
that the stability of the currency is a mixture of monetary and fiscal policy.
Indeed.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So indiscipline in the fiscal space can impact on the monetary space. And let's face it, it is government policy, largely speaking. We're speaking of balance of trade deficits and all these things. The failure in these respects cannot impact the currency. And so the framers of the Constitution, I am confident, understood this dynamic carefully when they gave the responsibility to the Bank of Ghana, that in this space you can't give the Bank of Ghana the sole responsibility, because in many cases, like he indicated again, the Bank of Ghana can have all the knowledge, can put in place all the policies, but if structural and other systemic failures are operational in other spaces, these are going to impact ultimately on the currency. So my thinking in this regard, therefore, is that it is a shared responsibility between government and the Bank of Ghana. But the reason why in many countries the central banks are often given this responsibility in a heavy way is mainly because you want to insulate the currency from the pressures of politics. And that's why, we know that the United States, for example, have been going hard on other countries, including China. There was the threat of calling China a currency manipulator, because they do not want countries to basically dictate by way of political decision-making, how currencies behave.
Yes.
And especially in the area of trade, to ensure that somehow other countries are dumped or have the goods of other countries dumped in because of all these manipulative things. But let me also take the liberty and let me seek the permission of Prof and you, since Prof said when it's law, he has to take permission. When it's economics, I'm a nobody. So let me just also seek permission to express a few opinions on some of the things that you said. And I share a lot of the things that you said. I think.
And just before you go there, Mr. Abuchi, just a quick one, please. When you look at Article 184 of the Constitution, which refers to foreign exchange dealings, and I agree with everything that you said, but when you look at 184, which says that the Committee of Parliament is responsible for financial measures, shall monitor the foreign exchange receipts and payments. And I bring this up because the committee is supposed to look at transparency in flows. Okay. When you read 184, it then goes on to tell you that government, of course, as you've said, is involved through parliament, legislature, through parliament. Shouldn't there be parliamentary approval of this committee if the monetary and the fiscal have agreed that we both impact currency depreciation, so we want to form a committee? Okay. Shouldn't we get parliamentary approval?
So once we go back to the question of parliamentary approval, the terms of reference for the Foreign Exchange Development Committee, I'll just read just a small portion of it. It says in the introduction that the establishment of the Foreign Exchange Development Committee, FX Developments Committee, was directed by Cabinet and endorsed in Parliament.
Oh, and endorsed in Parliament.
Yes, endorsed in Parliament as a bipartisan select group of experts from both private and public sector to review, assist and provide recommendations to the Economic Policy Coordinating Committee, EPCC, on how to improve the management, transparency, and long-term structure of Ghana's foreign exchange flows. The recommendations of the committee, when adopted by the EPCC, will form part of the broad-based policies of government geared towards the management of FX risks in the country. Let me just read just two more lines on the mandate. The committee is mandated to, among others, to review the current FX regime, identify the inherent constraints in the system, and proffer workable alternatives by way of policies and programs which potentially would reduce FX risks in the country. The committee must also provide advice on the infrastructure required for the efficient execution of FX in Ghana. Here, it is vital to emphasize the need for the committee to critically look at the role of automation and digitization. Okay, that's where Baumia may come in. As a critical enabler for FX reforms, the committee must also commission detailed data collection and analysis of all the disparate foreign exchange sources.
Well,
Interesting.
So I think you have an answer to your question.
Right. I have an answer to my question now, which was not put into the
never put in
statements,
the public.
that were put out
in
to
the
public.
Discussions with government people reacting.
Exactly. For me, and I had scanned the environment for something like that before I would mention it.
Okay.
I didn't have that, but now that you've given that to me, that lends credence to being able to set up the committee.
So I'll skip that part, except to, and I think I was just trying to, but thanks a lot for that. I think that clarifies Muna's concern. The issue about structural aspects of our economy, again, we can't ignore that.
No.
Let's be honest. If this committee is problematic, it may be problematic from the standpoint, among others, even of the number, the sheer number. That appears. If 40 is truly the number, then it sounds a bit unwieldy. But that's huge. That's huge in terms of how it can function. But it's in terms of how it will function.
Bigger than the committee.
Right. But from the standpoint of the legality of the committee itself, the point I made earlier to you, is that the committee can share the responsibility of the Bank of Ghana. The Bank of Ghana has a core mandate which is specifically indicated there, and where the responsibility of the Bank of Ghana is singular, the law is clear. In the case of monetary policy, or in this particular regard, the stability of the currency, I think the two distinguished economists have indicated that it is a linear relationship. And so one entity alone doesn't hold responsibility for that. I know your time is fast spent. Let me just make 1 or 2 points in this regard, now that I still have Prof's permission.
I'm only looking at you and surprised that you really need the permission.
Well, I'm just taking, please go ahead. Any permission?
I'm tempted to update my notes.
Well, but it's important for us to note that past efforts at dealing with the stability have also been a bit piecemeal. Let's be honest. This is not the first time we've come to the precipice. Remember, not too long ago, we had major quantitative easing initiatives where money was sunk into the economy just to create some stability. But you and I know that that is obviously usually a temporary measure, and not just a temporary measure.
But we're still doing that.
Yes.
We haven't changed that method.
Yes.
But we're still pumping
trying
dollars
to
in the
supply
system.
into the system.
Yeah.
Which also then depends on your ability to even supply.
Yeah.
So,
and our form of it is different from what the US did and the others.
It's different from the
And I'm actually surprised to discover also that sometimes officials, we go to the black market to get the money.
Well, that's where it is, so you have to go there.
Well, because you get higher returns there. You get higher returns. But, but
and part of the sources of my discovery without just this includes what you say thank you to me for. Thank you to Abdul Malik Kwekubako for intercepting those documents and sharing with us, which we are sharing with the public and government people themselves, communicating all the week and not giving a hint that there is a cabinet decision with Parliament endorsement for the FX Development Committee.
I didn't know that.
And a point he made, the issue of the capital flight. I think that's one thing that we usually gloss over. And when we speak about it, we don't appear committed to actually eradicate the problem. I mean, first of all, to what extent do Ghanaians own this economy?
Yes.
What is the percentage of Ghanaian ownership of this economy? Now, to the extent that you don't own the economy, capital flight is going to remain a major problem. And if you attempt to regulate capital flight through the law, then, the complaints...
Go underground.
Right, you either push things underground, and of course, the complaints and pressures of investors...
Our economy will collapse.
Will come in. So we have all these problems, which we have to find creative ways of ensuring that somehow we deal with some of these challenges that have been in the making for many, many years. Some countries have found ways of ensuring that there are reinvestments, for example. So you make so much, you can only export so much, you can only fly so much out of the country, and then you have to invest or reinvest whatever you earn. I think too much money leaves this country. Of course, we are all guilty about the dollarization. I'm sure all of us around the table here may have had one consultancy or something in the past in which things were monetized in dollars.
I keep to the rules.
That in itself,
they are not frequent for some of us.
But I keep to the rules. I must state that.
But
I'm not part of it.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear. Saying something. Let's be clear on this. Let's be clear on this. The economists tell us that man is rational. People will behave in rational ways. And people will behave in ways that maximize their returns on whatever transactions they're involved in.
And when it comes to making money, the lack of countries hold constant.
Absolutely.
Well, if the individual can maintain value of their income, the government should be doing the same too. And that's what people seek to do when they say, I'm quoting in dollars, you can pay in cedis.
Right.
It's about maintaining value.
Exactly.
And that's what government should be doing.
Transactions in a currency that is more stable.
That's right.
The essence of money baseline is also a store of value.
Right.
Exactly.
So once the cedi continues to depreciate, then it
not a store
ceases
of
to
value.
perform that function as a store of value. Then people would want to rather denominate their wealth in the currency that is more stable.
Right.
It's very basic. But you see, let's also add this one to what you just said. She mentioned something about our debt stock. If you look at the composition of our debt stock and the exposure, it makes the setting up of this committee a bit fundamental for me, also in managing market expectations. Because you see, in fact, actually,
that's what I said, those two words, managing expectations.
From your administration also,
yes.
with your permission, I'm
yes.
sure I can start.
No, government is a continuum,
yes.
and somehow you have the full civil service that is supporting you to put these things forward.
From 2015, we had a debt management strategy. Operationalizing that debt management strategy, we opened up and sought to tap into foreign capital.
Yes.
Because financing the budget deficit from the domestic market was going to crowd out the private sector.
That's right.
Rather than crowding them in.
And still insufficient.
Yes. Right. So we said that, okay, let's go to the international capital market.
And issue bonds.
Beyond that, we also said that we could still do cedi-denominated issue, but then open it up to foreign investors. So if you look at Ghana's debt stock pre-EPIC, we had more multilateral and bilateral. So it was easier for debt forgiveness. But if you look at the composition now, we have more commercial
And that's where interest rates play a critical role in the currency depreciation.
Even if we have it today,
to make a
yes.
point.
I want to conclude.
When it's done, then you give me 2 minutes each, and then we end it.
If I may just conclude, I still have your permission. If I may just conclude. But I wanted to just go back on the issue of balance of payment. Even though you mentioned that our trade receipts may have improved,
balance is positive.
Surplus is positive. The question is, what is the extent of the surplus? Now, one thing we can't ignore is that the balance of payment deficit in Ghana has been a long-standing problem. And it's going to be even more so, in fact, more dangerous in the coming years because of one fundamental development. And that development has to do with the adoption of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. That agreement, if it gets fully implemented, will imply that there will be a lot of movement of goods and services across Africa without a tariff restriction. Many countries have been worried. In fact, Nigeria, as you know, came very late in the day in signing.
Yeah, but they have not ratified.
Well, they haven't ratified, but they're concerned.
There'll be more moving parts to all of this.
Their concern, among many others, is the fact of some countries in Africa basically acting as staging posts for other countries outside the continent, and basically taking their goods, rebranding them, and then spreading them across Africa in the absence of tariffs. The most important thing is, as we have Guta, for example, crying, if you have the AFCTA in full flight, you may probably have about 3 or 4 more Gutas in town.
That's right.
Yes.
Because it's going to be a very lucrative area, importing things and basically distributing them without having to deal with all the difficulties and pains of machinery and equipment and factories and all that. So we need to deal with the structural and fundamental aspect of this. Because when the city has issues, everybody feels it. I mean, your salary is no more what it used to be by the time it hits your account.
Because and it fits into local price development.
Right. So I think I'll basically leave it here for now.
Right. But the permissions he's asking for and all. Because today I was having a discussion with
laughing stock of us or something, right?
With Mr. Abuchi, and because he references the AFTA, and his perspective about this thing that now the call them developed countries, one president gets up, invite all our presidents to go and sit under them.
Something African summit, something Ghana summit.
Yes, if we actually focused on what we have.
I honestly don't understand.
Population at our,
if I can just use the opportunity as you just brought that up, I've always mentioned this. You know, the GDP the GDP of Russia, for example, 1.5 trillion. The GDP of Africa is more than that.
Yeah,
the GDP
combined is over $3 trillion.
So the question I ask is, who should be hosting who?
Exactly.
France is hosting Africa. Russia is hosting Africa. The UK just hosted Africa. Turkey is hosting. Many of these countries, our combined GDP is more than them. And our combined GDP, you're speaking of just the production. Talk of, as you mentioned, the things on the ground. When you talk of our extractive resources that we have, it's way in excess of all these countries. We should be hosting them. And for me, the thing is, of course, we all know the African problem. We're not talking among ourselves. We are not united. We still have the Balkanized continent. You know, the French countries are still hooked to their metropolitan country, former metropolitan country, France. But on a more modern and more specific thing, if you take, for example, the WTO agreement. The WTO agreement has measures in there for countries under pressure, for small economies, and for countries that are facing the challenges of dumping to activate. One of them is what is called the countervailing rules. You know, when you activate the countervailing rules, you can actually keep out of your domain goods that you think constitute dumping. And you and I have to be honest about it. We know in Ghana, there are many goods in town which, frankly, are purely in the scope of dumping.
We are not leveraging on our market. That's serious.
And because we are not one to negotiate from position of strength.
We don't have to negotiate the problem. This one, the law allows you.
So Mona, starting with you in 2 minutes, do you not agree that this committee has a role, and depending on how it performs its role, can assist to have a sort of a permanence of arresting, the forex situation in this country? Meantime, Kofi, Dr. William Boateng, right, he says that Kofi's point of rationality is very profound, and this is an economist talking to you, a lawyer. It's only policy and systems that could shape people's behavior in manner that would not direct the economy in a wrong direction. Yes.
I would just say this in 1 minute. I believe that this committee, its role, the things it's supposed to do, are things that should have been done already, are actually being done already, because there are so many times where the Ministry of Finance or the Central Bank have called these same people to informal meetings.
Okay.
So these are things that are going on already. I think that if we want to formalize it and have it permanent, that we have a permanent committee that even gives feedback to both the Bank of Ghana and the Ministry of Finance, that's fine as well. I speak to the timing of this committee, that it seems to have come late in the day, but it has still come. It can be useful if we widen its mandate more than flows, because what will address the depreciation of the cedi is more than just looking at the flows, but looking at fiscal discipline, looking at the structure of the economy and so forth. So perhaps we should look at that committee in a much broader perspective and make its work more comprehensive, and again make it permanent so that they can always give feedback, which they do anyway. But let us say that in the past, the feedback, maybe it's not going through proper channels, it's not being monitored by Parliament. Now that you tell me that there is Parliament approval, that their feedback would also be made known to us, the citizens, and be made known to all the other development partners and to agencies like the World Bank and IMF who want to assist us grow our economy.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Prof.
Yes, so thank you. I think that when the announcement was made, I believe that maybe largely we didn't take time to actually do a little bit of research, as you have.
No, but there are other professors who have assessed the whole situation.
But that is what I'm saying. That so
and their conclusion, I suppose, may not change.
Yes,
Or
what I'm
could
saying,
change
what I'm saying that if you look at it purely from the perspective of arresting the cedi, the depreciation, then this committee perhaps is not necessary, because it will not be able to deliver on that objective. But if you look at the composition of our
but if it delivers on the objectives of the forex as they have been set up,
it
what
will
is
only
the
deliver
effect?
on flows. It
Yes.
won't deliver on depreciation.
No, I thought the
currency.
effect will be natural.
No.
Do you know
That will affect the city's stability.
To a large extent, it will harness knowledge.
Yes.
But I can tell you that our problem as a country is more implementation and the consistency.
Okay.
And it doesn't lie within this committee to do that. That is where I'm coming from.
Okay.
And when you talk about the structural rigidities and all of that, I'm not too sure this committee.
The mandate
actually
has to
can
be
do
much
that.
wider.
But because when you look at the composition of our debt stock today,
The
market,
structural rigidities, they are among their responsibilities. They are to achieve these things. These are the expectations.
The encouragement is that the Minister of Finance is on that.
Properly scrutinize
Yes.
the existing FX execution systems. Identify the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. Apply forward-looking research on all FX sources and uses to provide better forecasting for proactive FX management, as well as incorporating related issues such as import prioritization and substitution, and what the impact of the following have on the FX. 1, the African Continental Free Trade Area and the introduction of a single currency, ECO, in the West African Economic Bloc. They are to offer counsel to the EPCC on efficient market intervention, transparent rate setting, and instantaneous price discovery. The committee is to collaborate with FX committees in other jurisdictions to share perspectives of common interest on the structure and functioning of the FX market. And finally, the committee is to propose to the EPCC steps that would support the efforts of the Bank of Ghana in attaining the membership criteria of the Global Financial Economic Exchange.
If this is the mandate of the
are
committee, then the membership is question mark in terms of capacity.
I see.
Because how many, if you look at the 40-member committee, a number of them are technical, and the rest would really just be bringing data to the table. But they don't have the capacity.
Defining volatility benchmarks.
Oh my goodness! I doubt that they have the capacity to address what you have done.
Yeah. If that committee doesn't
this committee is now becoming Ministry of Finance and Bank of Ghana.
Another thing, though, that may be a small point, maybe a footnote. for us to notice is the fact that I think the Cedi has almost invariably suffered in election years. If you look at the trend analysis,
Yes.
so almost invariably the Cedi has suffered in election years. And what question you may ask is this Cedi, particularly the January Cedi, I'm talking about the January Cedi, not the before January, is the January Cedi responding to anticipatory factors, you know, things that may not have happened yet, but in anticipation of the fact
Usually
that in
it's
elections,
all-
the usual overspending
put
and
in,
you know,
yeah,
among others.
it's
The
factored in.
anticipation,
It's
yes.
all
So that was
factored
my
in.
question, really.
It's all factored
Now we are
in.
going into 2020
Yeah.
elections.
Correct. That's the anticipatory stuff.
Yeah.
you know.
Yes.
So
The
that's
Cedi
all
something that is
factored in.
more of also
Managing
managing market
expectations.
expectations.
Yeah,
Because
managing
if you look at the
expectations.
composition of our
But
debt
we'll
stock, it's very-
destroy all of this in December 2020, by December 2020, right?
Thank you.
No, I don't
It-
have to be a
that-
prophet.
that-
I don't have to
answers
be a prophet. That's
Well,
what
no,
I'm
no,
that
no,
answers
Sam,
your
something.
question then.
That depends on whether, if that is true, that depends on whether the anticipatory things happen. If they don't happen, even though the instability may have already been occasioned, the extent to which it further depreciates or gains against the major other currencies may be dependent, I think, to an extent.
So
Prof
my
will correct me,
question
but
to you,
I'm
Prof,
sure.
that question.
So expectation plays a critical role in the depreciation of the city, especially given the composition of our debt stock. You see, there's so much negative news emanating from this country. And in the market, negative news exert greater volatility in the market than positive news of the same magnitude. So we have foreign investors who are participating heavily in our debt stock. So negative news, exaggeration and all of that, they don't have the benefit of checking here and there. And they price that. And if they decide to seek early redemption of their investment, okay, and our FX market is very shallow.
Okay.
It's very shallow. So that is where I think the committees it's setting up is good to the extent that it can help manage that expectation.
And that is-
But if you look at all that you have read here also, they are more of input, making input.
And I doubt that they have the capacity.
my encouragement is
And
that
the
the
last
Minister of
point is
Finance is on
interesting
that.
also because of the political
And
game.
since
Why
it's-
is that your encouragement?
And that
A decision
when
maker, I'm
not
like-
too
a
long
decision
ago,
maker who is
we're
making the
told
decision at the
we're
very
told
last
about
minute.
the speculation.
All this time.
Yes.
The speculation and all the talk about the city not being really important was just about incompetence.
They
And
do
was
it
not about
against
what
each
he said.
other.
Why didn't they do
Okay.
that
And
right
that
at the
is why I
beginning,
think
since they
that
were
the
so
politics
competent?
is becoming mute now
Okay.
because
That's
the
right.
evidence
Alright,
is
so-
telling us that
So
let's
once
go
again, we are
beyond
back to
Let's
that.
go
Be
beyond
careful,
Let's
please
get
don't
to
talk
reality.
down the city.
Yes.
We'll be
Don't.
right back.
Because
We'll be
its
right
effect
back.
will not discriminate.
We'll be
The city
right
will
back
evolve.
to ask
That's right.
questions about the bank collapse or bank closures and the processes towards prosecution. We know that recoveries have been made so far. About 1 billion has been recovered, but your money, my money, almost 20 billion has gone into this. Are we getting it back with the prosecutions? We'll be right back.